Okay, so for topic number 3, we want to look at creating a budget. So when we go to create a budget, it helps to have some guidelines as to how much we spend in each category. So in this particular recommendation, we are looking at 30% for housing, food 20%, transportation 12%, entertainment 10%, health and personal care 10%, clothing 8%, and miscellaneous 10%. And if we total all of those up, that would account for 100% of our budget, which would equal to 100% right down here. So what we're basically saying is obviously anyone can spend any amount of money they want on whatever they want, but the kind of guideline is that no more than around a third of our house, a third of our income should go on into housing, and that would include utilities, etc. You know, we don't want to be spending more than 20% of our money on food-ish as a guideline. Okay, if we're spending all of our money on transportation, so maybe we just bought a brand new car and we spent a bunch of money on clothes one month, we might not have enough money left for food. So these are guidelines that sort of just help us to plan for our month to month. So let's just look at the first example. It says Kelly and Maria will share an apartment while they attend college. Their monthly income is $4,200. According to the guidelines above, approximately how much can they afford for housing? So if we look at the housing, the recommendation for housing is 30%. And of course, to change a percent, we never multiply anything by a percentage because a percent means out of 100. So this would be 30 divided by 100. And we can either do that by hand or we can pop that into a calculator and we would get 0.3. Okay, what we're doing is actually we're taking 30% and we're changing that, we're moving that decimal back 2 places. So if you wanted to do that by hand, the decimal is behind the whole number, and we would move that, would divide by 10 and divide by 100, which would mean our decimal moves back 2 places, which is 0.3 as a decimal. So we can do that by hand or using our calculator. And then if I want to know what is 30% of $4,200, well, of generally means multiply, out of means divide, but of means multiply. So if I want to find 30% of $4,200, I want to multiply those. So 4,200 times by 0.3. And if I just pop that into my calculator, I will get $1,260. So that's the general recommendation as to kind of the maximum they would want to be spending on housing. So if they save a little bit on housing and maybe they only have rent of $1,000, then they have a little bit money left over for miscellaneous or savings, okay? I noticed there's no savings category here, and if you actually do create a category or a budget, oftentimes it's a good idea to add a category for savings, just because it's always good to have a little bit of a rainy day fund, right? There's months when the car breaks down, or you need a new refrigerator, or you're sick for a couple days and you don't work. So all kinds of reasons you should have a little savings account, but that doesn't happen to be in this budget table. Transportation, so in this case, we're looking at 12%. So 12%, so that would be 12 out of 100, and 12 divided by 100 is 0.12. Okay, again, I just think about where's that decimal. That decimal is just right here behind the 12. We would move the decimal back. That would be divided by 10, and this would be divided by 100. So our decimal is 0.12. We can use a calculator, or we can do that by hand. And then we just take that 0.12, and if I want 12% of 4,200, we're going to multiply that out. And we get $504. So the maximum they should be spending on transportation would be about $504. Okay. Entertainment is 10%. So 10% is 10 divided by 100, which is 0.1, and 4,200 times 0.1 would be $420. So for entertainment, we sort of have a limit of $420. Okay, and then clothing's 8%. which is 8 divided by 100. And again, we can put that in our calculator, or if we move that decimal back, well, there's only one digit, that's divided by 10. Dividing by 100 means we have to insert a 0 in front of the 8. So we would get here as a decimal 0.08. And in fact, that decimal place, that's the hundredths spot. Okay, that's the hundredths spot in our place value. So that means, in fact, 8 hundredths, right? That's 8 hundredths. And as a decimal, so we get 4,200 times 8%, and as a decimal, that's 0.08. So when we multiply that through, we get $336. Okay, so there's the kind of the guidelines about how much they should spend on each category of their $4,200. Okay, let's move on to the next example here. Okay then, so to look at the next example, we've got the Singh family listed their monthly expenses below. So this time we know what they're spending. We don't want to figure out what they're spending, but we want to know what percentage they are spending to see if they're within the guidelines of the correct percentages. So if we total up, we will definitely need the total. So if we total up this column, we will find that they are working with a total budget of $4,410. Okay, that's their total amount that they seem to be spending. So what percentage is that? Well, if I asked you to find the percentage on an exam, let's just say, for example, you got 18 out of 20 on an exam. And if you put that in your calculator, that's 18 divided by 20, and your calculator would pop out as 0.9, and you would multiply that by 100, and you would get 90%. Okay, well, this is the same process. We're saying we're spending 1,200 divided by 4410, and we're going to multiply that by 100, that decimal that we get, and we are going to get a total of 27% there. Okay, 27%. And that 1,200 divided by 4410 is equal to a nice, it works out to be 27.2, right? 0.027, so, or sorry, 0.27. So we want to make sure that we're not rounding incorrectly. So when we do the next one, for example, that one was just 27%. When we do the next one, this 860 divided by 410, we just want to watch our rounding, because when I do 860 divided by 4410 and multiply that by 100, I get 0.195. So if I'm rounding to the nearest percentage, we're going to look at that decimal, the third number, and when I move that decimal over, that 19.5 is going to become 20%. So let's watch our rounding, and why don't you pause the video now and calculate the remaining calculations, just to see the remaining percentages for the Singh family. Okay, so hopefully you got some of the same percentages, or the same percentages that I did: 16, 6, 5, 7, 11, and 9. And so there would be the percentages for the Singh's budget and what they're spending. And then what you could do is you could go back, if you were sort of their advisor, or if they were looking at their budget, and they could go back to these guidelines and they could say, how close are we? Well, our housing budget, we're only spending 27, so that's pretty good. Food is 20. They're not really spending a ton of money on health and personal care. The percentage is a little low, so maybe they need to take care of themselves a little bit more, or maybe that's okay, right? Maybe it depends on the month, and every month might not be the exact same. These are just guidelines again. Okay? Let's head on to the next. All right then, for this next example, it says this table summarizes Mel's monthly budget. Determine the percentage of income that Mel spends in each category. Round all answers to the nearest whole number. So if we're looking at Mel's amounts here, again, we need a total. So we're going to total up his columns here, the column here of all of his different expenses. And we need that so we can find a percentage of what he's spending in each. And the column total here is 2,000. $2,600. So I'm just plugging that into my calculator. And then, of course, we want a percentage, and we're going to take that $950 and that he's spending on housing and utilities, and 950 divided by 2,600 multiplied by 100 will give us our percentage of 37%. Okay, and if we go down and calculate all of these, this next one would be 21%. So I'm going to ask you to pause the video, and you can complete and fill in the rest of the table here, and then we'll go down and we'll talk about this column right here. So go ahead and pause the video now. Okay, so hopefully you came up with the same percentages as I did, 3, 19, 8, 3, and 10. And just note, if you were to sum up or total up the percentages here, you would get 101%, which we know is just due to rounding, okay? We know if we've rounded to the nearest whole number, we round it up and down, and we would actually know that it's close, you know, if we were to round more to more decimals, we would get closer to 100%. So don't worry too much about that. Now, if we were in class, we would have actually come up and drawn a circle graph. So we're going to kind of sketch one, and then I'm going to show you a program that you can do that really quickly with that is probably less archaic than we would have done nowadays anyway. So if I were to draw a circle, okay, I'm going to just draw a circle, and just to remind us of how many degrees are in a circle, I know that I can divide that circle into quarters, like on a coordinate plane, and each of these quarters is 90 degrees. Okay, so there's a good visual, and so we know that a circle has 90 times 4, which is 9 times 4 is 36, so that's 360 degrees in it. Now, if I wanted to know how to draw a circle graph of Mel's budget, because it's sometimes nice to put things into a chart, I would take his percentage and I would say, well, what percentage of the circle of the 360 degrees is 37%? So I would need to change that back into, a decimal. Okay, so I would change that back into a decimal of 0.37, right, by doing 37 divided by 100, okay, because percent means out of 100, so 37 divided by 100, which would be 0.37, and then I would multiply that by 360, and I believe I get 133 degrees, okay, and the same thing here, I would take this 21 and I would divide by 100, and I would get 0.21 times by 360, and I will get 76 degrees, and so on. This next one, 3 divided by 100, 0.03 times by 360, and I'm just using my calculator, and I will get 11 degrees. So why don't you pause the video and complete the last 4 degree values there. Okay, so again, I hope you got the same percentages as I did. And now what we would do if we were drawing a circle graph is, well, first off, these circle graphs, it would need a title. So we could say Mel's budget. There's not really much room for a title up above here, but that would be Mel's budget. We always need a title. And then here we would take our 133 degrees, and if we had a protractor, we would literally measure that out. So of course, I know that 90 degrees would be right there. That would be a 90-degree angle. So I know 133 would just be probably somewhere around here, okay? And then I would just color that in. So I'm going to use black to start, just because I was on the black color. And that's the housing and utilities. So under the legend, we would just create a little color chart or something like that. And then food and clothing is 76 degrees. So that's probably something around like this. Okay, here's our food and clothing. And then we've got health and personal care of 11 degrees. That's just a little sliver, isn't it? So I would take that sliver and I would draw that picture there. Okay, there's our health and personal care. Transportation, let's choose some blue here, 68 degrees. Probably something like that. And then we've got to fill in 29 degrees here. Looks like that might be a little bit, I may have crunched that a little too small there, not left myself enough space, but then I would choose like 29 degrees, might be something like this. And then we need a little, oh, and I forgot to fill this in. Our transportation there was supposed to be blue. And our savings, we've got a little sliver of savings here. Maybe I'll do yellow, okay? In 11, and then we've got a little chunk left over here. Let's maybe do pink, since we haven't used pink. And there's our 36 degrees. Okay, so, oh, and there that yellow here was our savings. So that's one way to do it, and we would have done that with a protractor in class and some markers. But another way, I just want to show you that there's a Google Sheet program here that's quite awesome. And what I did is I went into the Google Sheets, I input the values, housing and utilities, 950, food and clothing, etc. And what I did is I've just selected those, and what I want to do is I'm going to go in here and I want to look at Explore. And when I push Explore, it automatically brings up a graph for me. This is a bar graph, okay? So it brought up a bar graph, which is quite amazing and easy to do. All we did was just select those cells in our spreadsheet program. And then if I go in here, and if I click on this graph and I want to edit it, I can go in and I can change the type. So I'm just going to change that type to a bar, from a bar graph to a circle graph. And we also need a title. I'm going to go back at a type. We need a title here, so I'm going to call that Mel's Budget. Oops. Mel with an apostrophe. I don't know where my apostrophe is. There it is. Mel's Budget. Okay. And I'm going to update my title and click on this check mark, and there's our beautiful pie chart. Okay, so it's actually probably more realistic nowadays with the computers to be able to do this, and this really wasn't hard. So I just want you to know that this is super easy. If you ever needed to do something like this on your own, you can Google how to create a pie chart. You can do this in Microsoft Excel spreadsheets, or this is in the new Google spreadsheet formula or page, so program. So there's Mel's Budget right there, looking beautiful. So if you are back in Notability, back in our workbooklet here, I guess, back in my program here, if you were to do the practice questions, I think you could probably do number 1 and number 2 and then number 4, and you're not really going to be able to do an accurate pie chart without a protractor at home. But if you wanted to just sort of do a rough sketch, there's a beautiful sketch down there below. So you could either do that, or if you wanted to try and do one on the Google Classroom or the Google Sheets program, that would work well as well. I mean, it's an option, okay? If you want to try to create one on Google Sheets, and what you would do is you would enter these values, okay? In the Google Sheets, you would enter 2 columns, and then you would just select them. So 1 column and 2 columns, okay? Column 1 and column 2. And then you would you would go to Explore there like I did and create a chart. So not necessary, that's just an optional, okay? So number 4 is kind of optional for you. But I do want you to be aware of how that works. Okay, I hope everything's going well, and if you have any questions or concerns, please do not hesitate to contact me or Mr. Cito, and we will be happy to help you. Thank you. Have a great day.